Mama, please don't go. I'm getting so cold." The words, whispered by a child, were a fragile plea against the biting November wind that swept across the manicured lawns of Graceland Cemetery. Lorenzo Moretti, at 75 years old, stopped dead. He had come to this place of silent monuments and sleeping memories, expecting only the familiar companionship of his own grief. Instead, he heard the raw, heartbreaking sound of a living sorrow. The silver head of his ebony cane tapped an urgent rhythm against the gravel path as he moved with a speed that defied his age. There, huddled against the polished black granite of his daughter's headstone, was a small boy, no older than 5 or 6. His skin was the rich, deep color of polished mahogany, and his dark, tightly coiled hair was flattened on one side, where he'd been pressing his cheek to the stone. He clutched a threadbare stuffed lion, its mane frayed and one of its button eyes missing. He looked impossibly small, a tiny vessel of misery rocking back and forth at the grave of Isabella Moretti. His Isabella, his beautiful lost girl. Lorenzo's voice, a gravelly instrument accustomed to commanding boardrooms and bending wills, came out as a tremor. He bent his stiff frame, the effort causing a sharp pain in his back that he ignored. "What are you doing here, son?" The boy startled, his small body flinching as he hugged the lion tighter. His eyes, wide and dark and heartbreakingly familiar, darted up at the imposing old man. I'm waiting for my mama," he whispered, his voice catching on a sob. "But she's sleeping, and she won't wake up." A vice of ice and fire clamped around Lorenzo's chest. He had mourned Isabella for a full year, a year spent entombed in a fortress of regret and unspoken apologies. Now, looking at this child, a grief heavier than any he had ever known threatened to buckle his knees. It was a grief laced with a dawning, impossible truth. "What is your name?" he asked, forcing a gentleness into his tone that felt foreign on his tongue. "Leo," the boy said, his lower lip trembling. Lorenzo's throat felt as if it were closing. "And your mother?" he managed to ask, though he already knew. He could see it in the boy's eyes, in the curve of his mouth. Leo's small hand, clad in a fingerless glove, lifted and pointed a shaky finger toward the elegant script carved into the headstone. "Isabella. That's my mama." The world tilted on its axis. Lorenzo's cane dug deep into the soft earth as he fought to remain upright. Isabella had left him years ago. She had run off with a man he had deemed unworthy, a man without name or fortune. They had fought, a terrible, world-shattering fight, filled with words that could never be unsaid. She had walked out of his Lake Forest villa and out of his life. He had thought he had lost her forever in that moment, but the news of her death, delivered by a cold, anonymous phone call a year ago, had taught him the true meaning of loss. And now, standing before him, was her son, his grandson. "Leo," Lorenzo whispered, the name a prayer and a curse. Tears, hot and sharp, burned paths down his weathered cheeks. "Oh my God! D." Just as the revelation threatened to shatter him completely, the sound of pounding footsteps on the gravel path broke the somber quiet of the cemetery. A man appeared, breathless and frantic, his clothes thin and worn, his face etched with the hardships of a life lived on the margins. His desperate eyes locked onto the child. "Leo!" he cried out, his voice a ragged mix of terror and relief. He rushed forward and scooped the boy into his arms, crushing him against his chest in a fierce, protective embrace. The boy buried his face into the man's worn jacket, his small body clinging as if he had been adrift in a vast ocean and had finally found his shore. Lorenzo stiffened, his knuckles white as he gripped his cane. The grief that had momentarily softened him now hardened into a cold, familiar fury. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice regaining its customary authority, a low thunder that rolled through the rows of silent graves. The man looked up, his expression a chaotic blend of defensiveness and desperation. "I'm his father," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion Lorenzo couldn't decipher. "Please, don't take him from me. His mother, Isabella, she left me. She left us, and now she's gone forever. Please, don't take Leo too. He's all I have left." The fury in Lorenzo's chest ignited. His voice, when he spoke again, was no longer thunder. It was the crack of a whip. "Your selfishness is what took my daughter from me in the first place. Isabella abandoned her family. She abandoned her future. She threw her life away because of you. And now you have the audacity to stand on her grave and beg me not to claim my own blood?" The man flinched as if struck, but his hold on Leo only tightened. "I loved her," he said, his voice hoarse with unshed tears. "I failed her. I know I did. But I never, ever stopped loving her. And Leo, he's my son. He's everything I have left of her." Lorenzo's chest heaved, each breath a struggle against the rage that consumed him. His words were sharp, honed by years of cutting down rivals and enemies. "And he is my grandson. Do you honestly believe I will allow him to slip away as well? You took Isabella. You will not take her son from me." Leo peeked out from the safety of his father's arms, his eyes wide with a fear and confusion that tore at Lorenzo's heart. "Grandpa," he whispered, the word a fragile, questioning sound that trembled as it left his lips. Lorenzo's gaze met the boy's, and for a split second the towering rage faltered, replaced by a raw, unfiltered agony. He saw his daughter in that small face, a ghost of her childhood innocence looking back at him. He extended a hand, his fingers trembling. "Yes, Leo," he said, his voice thick with a pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I am your grandfather, and I will not lose you, too." The father's grip on his son seemed to tighten and loosen, a physical manifestation of the war being waged within him between love and guilt, defiance and despair. The three of them stood in a fragile, sorrowful triangle: an orphaned child, a grieving father, and a grandfather drowning in regret, all bound together by the memory of the woman they had lost. The wind gusted, scattering a flurry of dry brown leaves across the face of the headstone, momentarily obscuring Isabella's name. Lorenzo's voice, quieter now but laced with an unbreakable resolve, sliced through the silence. "Isabella deserved a better life than the one you gave her. I will see to it that her son has the life she was denied, even if it means I have to fight you for him every single day." The man, whose name Lorenzo didn't yet know, lowered his head. Tears finally broke free, streaking through the grime on his weary face. Leo clutched his stuffed lion, his small body caught in the crossfire of two worlds he could not possibly comprehend. Lorenzo Moretti straightened his spine, his back rigid against the weight of his years and his grief. For the first time since Isabella's death, his sorrow had a purpose. His grief had found a direction. He had lost his daughter. He would not, he could not, lose her son. The black Cadillac moved with a silent, predatory grace through the imposing iron gates of the Moretti villa. As dusk began to bleed across the Chicago sky, the sprawling Lake Forest mansion rose against the horizon like a fortress of limestone and glass, its windows igniting with a warm, golden light that offered no real warmth at all. Lorenzo sat stiffly in the plush leather of the back seat, his ebony cane laid across his knees, his face a mask carved from granite. Beside him, Leo was a small, quiet presence, leaning heavily against his father's chest. The worn stuffed lion was squashed between them, a relic from another, harder life. The father's name, Lorenzo had learned from a whispered exchange in the car, was Marcus. Lorenzo hadn't asked. He didn't care to know. Marcus's arms were wrapped in a desperate protective circle around his son, his eyes darting from the opulent alien world sliding past the tinted windows to the formidable old man seated beside him. Rocco, Lorenzo's driver and man of all work, drove in stoic silence, his jaw clenched, his unease at the unexpected passengers radiating from the front seat. Lorenzo had not spoken a word since their departure from the cemetery. Only the slow, measured rhythm of his breathing betrayed the tempest raging within him. When the Cadillac finally came to a halt beneath the grand columned portico, the front doors of the mansion opened. Arthur, the butler, stepped out onto the marble steps. His years of service were etched into his ramrod posture and the cautious, knowing look in his eyes. He froze for a fraction of a second as the rear door opened and Lorenzo emerged, followed by the boy and the disheveled man. "Sir," Arthur's voice, usually so steady, faltered. Shall I have the east wing prepared for your guests?" Lorenzo's reply was clipped, each word a shard of ice. "Prepare a room for the boy, the blue room." Nothing more. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax, old leather, and money. A massive crystal chandelier cast a brilliant, fractured light across the cavernous grand hall, but the palpable tension made every shadow feel colder, deeper. Leo's eyes grew wide as he stared up at the sweeping staircase, the oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, the sheer, overwhelming scale of the place. He clutched his lion tighter, his voice a tiny whisper that was almost lost in the vast space. "It's bigger than the shelter." Marcus bent down, his lips brushing the top of his son's head. "It's just a house, little man. Don't let it scare you." Lorenzo heard him. He turned, his cane striking the polished marble floor with a sharp, authoritative crack that echoed through the hall. "Do not fill his head with your fear. This is his home now." His voice was iron, absolute. Marcus bristled, straightening to his full height. "His home? You met him an hour ago. You didn't even know he was alive until today. And now you think you can just claim him. Just take him." The two men stood face to face, the air between them crackling with a shared grief that had curdled into anger. Rocco lingered a few feet away, a silent, watchful sentinel, his hand hovering near his phone as if awaiting an order. Leo, caught in the crossfire, clung to his father's leg, his small face a mask of confusion, torn between the only parent he had ever known and the powerful, frightening grandfather he had just discovered. "Isabella left me because of you," Lorenzo said, his voice low and dangerous, each word a carefully aimed dart. "She abandoned her family. She abandoned this life. She abandoned everything she had, because you poisoned her mind and lured her away. And now she is gone." He took a step closer. "Do you truly expect me to forgive that?" Marcus's face hardened, but his voice shook with a volatile mix of sorrow and defiance. "I loved her, Moretti. Maybe I didn't love her the way you wanted. Maybe I couldn't give her the money and the power you think are so important. But I loved her. She made a choice. She chose to be with me. And yes, I failed her. I admit that. I failed her in 1,000 ways. But I will not fail our son." Lorenzo's cane struck the floor again, another sharp crack of sound. "He is my blood as well. He is Isabella's son, my grandson." Do you think for 1 second I will allow you to drag him through the same poverty, the same squalor, the same mistakes that led to her death? Never. Leo's eyes darted between the two towering figures of his father and grandfather, his small voice breaking the standoff. "Please don't fight," he pleaded. "Mama hated it when people yelled." The two men fell silent, the weight of the child's words pressing down on their hearts like a physical blow. The anger in their faces was momentarily replaced by a shared, piercing grief. Lorenzo looked away first, his jaw working as he swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. Dinner was an exercise in strained silence. The long, formal dining table, typically set for business partners and city dignitaries, now held only 4-place settings. Lorenzo sat at the head, a king in his castle. Leo was seated beside him in a chair that seemed to swallow him whole. Marcus sat across from them, a prisoner at the feast, while Rocco stood watch near the door, a silent, imposing guard. Silver platters, presented by a nervous-looking maid, revealed roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and green beans glistening with butter. Lorenzo's attempt at a grand gesture, a display of the life Leo could have, felt almost grotesque against the backdrop of raw tension. Leo poked at the food on his plate with a fork, his eyes wide. "We never had food like this at the shelter," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his son's. "Eat, little man. It's good for you." The boy tried, taking a small, hesitant bite of chicken, but his gaze kept wandering around the cavernous room, overwhelmed by the heavy draperies, the dark wood, and the glowering portraits on the walls. Lorenzo watched him, his expression unreadable. "You will never be hungry again, Leo. You will have everything you could ever need here." His tone was meant to be a promise, a reassurance, but to Marcus, it sounded like a threat. He bristled. "Food isn't everything, Moretti. Love, a sense of belonging, those matter more than a full plate." "Love?" Lorenzo snapped, the word dripping with contempt. "Love without security is a fantasy. It's a lie poor people tell themselves. I gave Isabella everything. The best schools, opportunities, a future laid out for her on a silver platter. And she threw it all away for you. Look where your love led her." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, the force rattling the silverware and making Leo jump. "You think your money saves people? Isabella left because she was suffocating under your rules, under your control. She wanted to be free, not trapped in a cage made of gold. And don't you dare blame me for her death. She was broken by the chasm between the two of you long before she ever met me." The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. Lorenzo's face flushed a deep, dangerous red, his breathing sharp and audible in the silence. For a moment, it looked as though the old man might erupt, that the carefully controlled fury would finally explode. But then his gaze fell upon Leo. The boy was staring down at his plate, his small shoulders shaking, a single tear threatening to spill onto the fine china. Lorenzo's voice, when he finally spoke, was broken, quieter. "Leo," he said, his anger dissolving into a wave of profound regret, "I failed your mother. I was too proud, too stubborn. I will not fail you." He reached a trembling hand across the vast expanse of the table, his fingers resting lightly over the boy's. Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes a battleground of anger and despair. He saw the bond beginning to form between the old man and his son, and it terrified him. He loved Leo more than life itself, but he could not deny the truth staring him in the face. He could never give his son what Lorenzo Moretti could offer: the grand house, the endless meals, the safety from a world that had been so cruel to them. Still, he couldn't let go. He wouldn't. After dinner, Arthur escorted Leo to the Blue Room, a space that had been prepared with startling efficiency. The boy wandered through it in a daze, his small hands touching the soft quilt on the bed piled high with pillows, the heavy velvet curtains, the rows of brand-new books neatly stacked on a shelf. He climbed onto the massive bed, hugging his worn lion. "It's so soft," he murmured to the toy. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, watching. For the first time in a year, his heart felt something other than the crushing weight of grief or the burning fire of rage. It felt full. But the moment was shattered when Marcus appeared behind him, his voice low and firm. "Don't think this means you've won. He's my son. I won't let you steal him from me." Lorenzo turned, his eyes once again blazing with a cold fire. "Steal him? You let him wander alone in cemeteries. You let him grow up in homeless shelters. You call that protection? That is abandonment. If Isabella could see us now, she would know who is truly capable of keeping her son safe." Marcus stepped closer, their faces inches apart, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And if Isabella could see us now, she'd know her father is trying to control her son the same way he once tried to control her. Nothing has changed, old man." The two men stared each other down, locked in a silent battle, both bound by their love for the same child, both unwilling to yield an inch. In the room behind them, Leo lay curled up on the vast bed, whispering to his stuffed lion. "I just want them to stop fighting," he murmured into its frayed mane. "I just want my mama back." Lorenzo's hand tightened on his cane, the polished wood groaning under the pressure. He whispered to himself, a vow made to the ghost of his daughter. "Isabella, I couldn't save you, but I will save him." The grand halls of the Moretti villa echoed with silence that night, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the charged, heavy silence that comes before a storm. Morning sunlight sliced through the heavy curtains of the guest room, painting golden stripes across the ornate wallpaper. Leo stirred in the enormous bed, his small hands still clutching the tattered lion. For a disoriented moment, he forgot where he was. The impossible softness of the mattress, the faint, clean scent of lavender rising from the linens. It was a world away from the lumpy cots of the shelter or the cramped, transient apartments he vaguely remembered. But then, the memories of the previous night flooded back. The shouting, the anger that had felt like a physical force in the vast, cold rooms. A familiar tightness constricted his chest. He whispered into the lion's ear, "I don't want them to fight anymore." Downstairs, Lorenzo sat alone at the head of the immense breakfast table. A newspaper was spread before him, but its headlines were an unread blur. A cup of steaming black coffee sat untouched at his elbow. He stared out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the meticulously manicured gardens, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. Rocco stood by the doorway, a silent, ever-watchful statue. The oppressive silence was broken by the sound of footsteps. Marcus, his eyes weary and bloodshot, entered the dining room. He looked as if he hadn't slept, his posture defensive, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn trousers. Lorenzo folded the newspaper with slow, deliberate precision. "Is he awake?" Marcus nodded curtly. "He is." A flicker of pain crossed his face. He asked for his mother. The last words were a cracked whisper, and for a fleeting, unguarded moment, Lorenzo saw the man not as an adversary, but as a fellow traveler in the desolate landscape of grief. The moment passed. The bitterness, a more familiar companion, rose swiftly to the surface. Leo will need more than memories of Isabella, Lorenzo said, his voice cold as the marble floor. He needs a future you are incapable of providing. Marcus sank into a chair across the vast table from him, his hands clenching into fists on the polished wood. Don't you dare pretend you're some kind of savior here, Moretti. You didn't even know he existed. You weren't there when Isabella cried herself to sleep at night. You weren't there when she worried about how to pay the rent, or when she started getting sick. I was. I failed her. Yes, in so many ways. But I was there. Where the hell were you? Lorenzo's voice rose, sharp as shattered glass. I was here, waiting for her to come to her senses, waiting for her to come home. And now she's gone, because of the choices she made with you. The room grew thick with their animosity. Rocco shifted his weight, his unease palpable. Before the argument could escalate further, the light patter of small feet echoed in the hall. Leo appeared in the doorway, dwarfed by the oversized pajamas the maid had found for him. His eyes were still heavy with sleep, but a faint, hopeful smile touched his lips when he saw them both at the table. "Morning, Grandpa." "Morning, Daddy." The two men turned toward him, the hard, angry edges of their faces softening in an instant. The shared love for the boy was a language they both understood, even if it was the only one. Lorenzo rose from his chair and, with a formality that was almost tender, pulled out a seat for him. Marcus poured him a glass of orange juice, his movements gentle. For a brief, fragile moment, the three of them resembled something akin to a family. Leo took a sip of the juice and looked from his father to his grandfather, his gaze direct and innocent. "Are you still mad at each other?" he asked. His simple question was a blade that cut straight through their pride and anger. Neither man could find an answer. Finally, Lorenzo cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "No, Leo. We're just trying to figure things out." Marcus reached across the table, his fingers brushing a stray curl back from Leo's forehead. "Don't you worry about a thing, little man. You're safe." After breakfast, in a gesture that was both a peace offering and a power play, Lorenzo had Arthur bring out one of the heavy, leather-bound family albums. He laid the book on the table and opened it with careful, reverent hands. The pages were filled with photographs of Isabella as a child, a tiny girl in a pristine white dress at her first communion, a slightly older version of her at a piano recital, a radiant teenager at her high school graduation, a young woman laughing on a boat during a summer vacation on Lake Michigan. Leo leaned over the pages, his eyes wide with wonder. "That's Mama," he whispered, his small finger gently touching a photo of a young Isabella holding a bouquet of flowers. "Yes," Lorenzo said, his voice softer than Marcus had ever heard it. His own finger, gnarled with age, traced the outline of his daughter's face. "She was about your age in that picture." Marcus watched from the side, a silent, pained observer. His throat felt tight. He remembered a different Isabella, not the polished girl in formal dresses and carefully curated smiles, but a woman who was vibrant and alive, barefoot in their tiny, cramped apartment, her laughter echoing as they tried to cook spaghetti on a faulty hot plate. He desperately wanted to tell Leo about that Isabella, the one who had fought for every scrap of joy, even when surrounded by poverty. But Lorenzo's version of her, the one preserved in these gilded pages, seemed to consume all the air in the room. Leo turned another page, and his finger stopped on a blank rectangular space where a photograph had clearly been torn out. "What was here?" he asked, his curiosity untainted by the sudden tension that filled the space. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. a storm cloud passing over his face. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with," he muttered, his hand moving to turn the page. But Marcus spoke up, his voice clear and challenging. "It was a picture from the day she left, the day she walked away from all of this to be with me." He tore it out. Leo looked from his grandfather's closed-off expression to his father's pained one, confusion clouding his young features. Why did Mama leave? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Lorenzo's grip on his cane tightened until his knuckles were white. Because she was stubborn. She thought she knew better than everyone. Marcus's voice flared with a sudden hot anger. Because she wanted to be free from your rules. She wanted a life, not a gilded cage. The argument was about to ignite again, a familiar fire threatening to consume them. But then Leo's lower lip began to tremble, his eyes welling with tears. "Stop," he pleaded, his voice small and broken. "Please, don't yell." The men froze, their anger instantly extinguished by the sight of his distress. A flicker of shame crossed Lorenzo's face. Marcus closed his eyes, exhaling a long, slow breath. Lorenzo knelt by Leo's chair, a difficult, painful movement for his old bones. His voice was softer than it had been in years, stripped of its usual authority. "I'm sorry, my boy. We shouldn't fight in front of you. Your mother, she would not have wanted that." Leo sniffled, clutching his stuffed lion for comfort. "She told me once that fighting makes people forget how to love." Lorenzo's chest constricted. He remembered saying something remarkably similar to Isabella, years and years ago, before their own fights had consumed everything. He felt as though his daughter were speaking to him through her child, a ghostly echo across time. That afternoon, Lorenzo gave instructions to have a suite of rooms prepared for Leo, to be filled with toys, books, and new clothes. He wanted the boy to feel that this was his home, that he belonged. But Marcus bristled at the extravagant gesture, seeing it as another attempt to buy his son. "You think filling a room with toys is going to make up for the years you weren't there?" he challenged. Lorenzo didn't flinch. "I think giving him stability and security is the least I can do. He will not grow up wanting for anything." Marcus shook his head, the bitterness evident in his voice. "And what about love, Moretti? You can't buy that in a department store. He needs warmth and affection, not just walls lined with expensive things." The day stretched on, each hour marked by a tense civility that barely concealed the hostility simmering beneath. Leo discovered the vast gardens, his joyous laughter echoing across the perfectly manicured hedges as he chased butterflies. Lorenzo watched him from the window of his study, his heart a painful mix of pride and sorrow. Marcus watched from the terrace, torn between a profound gratitude for his daughter's safety and an ever-present fear that he was losing him. As evening began to settle, casting long shadows across the lawn, Lorenzo found himself standing alone in Isabella's old room. It had been preserved exactly as she had left it. The photographs, the books, the faint scent of her lavender perfume still clinging to the air, as if she had only just stepped out. He whispered into the silent, empty space. "Isabella, I don't know how to do this. I failed you so badly. I swear to you, I will not fail him." Outside, the lights of Chicago began to blink to life, a sprawling, indifferent galaxy of stars. Inside the great house, 3 lives were now inextricably bound together, caught in a fragile, precarious balance of love, grief, and pride. And though the night fell quiet once more, it was the quiet of anticipation, the kind that comes just before the storm breaks. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows of the Moretti villa the following morning, blurring the vibrant greens of the gardens into a watercolor of gray and gloom. Lorenzo stood in his study, cane in hand, watching the storm roll in from Lake Michigan. His thoughts churned with a ferocity that matched the thunder rumbling in the distance. Down the hall, he could hear Leo's laughter, a small, bright sound that somehow managed to pierce through the oppressive heaviness of the house. The boy was playing with his worn-out lion, his voice rising and falling in an animated conversation with the toy. For a brief moment, a smile almost touched Lorenzo's lips. But then he thought of Isabella, of her permanent absence, and of the man downstairs who he blamed for taking her away. His jaw tightened. Marcus sat in the breakfast room, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. The night had been restless, his sleep plagued by dreams of Isabella's face, sometimes smiling, sometimes filled with an unbearable sadness. He felt like an intruder in this house, a ghost at the feast, surrounded by a level of wealth he neither respected nor desired. But his son was here, and for now, that was enough to keep him rooted to this spot. Arthur, the butler, entered the room, his movements precise and cautious. "Sir, the morning papers have arrived." He handed a folded copy of the Chicago Tribune to Lorenzo, who had just entered. Lorenzo's eyes scanned the headline, and his face darkened. "Mystery child at Moretti estate fuels rumors of secret heir." Beneath the text was a grainy, long-lens photograph of his Cadillac pulling through the estate gates the day before. A blurry image of Leo, clutched in Marcus's arms, was clearly visible. "They already know," Lorenzo growled. He slammed his cane against the marble floor, the sharp crack making Leo, who had just skipped happily into the room, flinch. "Grandpa," the boy whispered, his smile faltering. Lorenzo forced his expression to soften. "It's nothing, Leo. Just some noisy people outside the gates." Marcus rose from his chair, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. The vultures will start circling, and he'll be caught in the middle of the storm." Lorenzo glared at him, his voice laced with cold fury. "And what would you prefer? That I leave him in a shelter? That he grow up invisible, forgotten by the world? No, he belongs here. He will have a name, protection, a future." Marcus's voice cracked with a desperate anger. "He needs love, Moretti. He needs to be seen as a person, not as a pawn in your games of legacy and power." Before the argument could fully ignite, Leo tugged on Lorenzo's sleeve. "Why are they taking pictures of me?" he asked, his voice small and confused. Lorenzo knelt, the movement stiff and painful, and looked into his grandson's wide, innocent eyes. "Because, Leo, people don't always understand things, but I will make sure they never, ever hurt you." The day unfolded under a cloud of unease. Reporters and photographers began to gather outside the main gates, their cameras flashing like strobes whenever a car entered or left. Rocco doubled the security patrols, his face a grim mask. Inside the fortress-like mansion, Lorenzo tried to maintain a semblance of control. He took meetings with his lawyers, his voice a low, commanding murmur during hushed phone calls with his advisors. But his attention always drifted back to Leo. The boy was a living, breathing reminder of Isabella, and every word he spoke, every smile that lit up his face, chipped away at the icy wall of anger that had encased Lorenzo's heart for so long. That afternoon, Leo wandered into Isabella's old music room. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light as he tentatively touched the keys of the grand piano, ran his small fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books on the shelves, and looked at the framed photographs. He stopped at a picture of Isabella holding a bouquet of wildflowers, her smile uncharacteristically free and radiant. "That's Mama," he whispered to his lion. Lorenzo entered the room quietly, his heart aching as he watched the boy's small fingers trace the edge of the frame. "She loved flowers," Lorenzo said, his voice surprisingly soft, "especially wild ones. She used to say they were the strongest because they could grow anywhere, even in the cracks in the pavement." Leo's eyes brightened. "I like flowers, too. At the shelter, I used to pick the little yellow ones that grew in the concrete." Lorenzo felt his throat tighten. "You are strong, Leo, just like her." From the doorway, Marcus's voice, shadowed and heavy, cut in. "And just like his mother, he deserves freedom. Not a cage, no matter how gilded it is." Lorenzo turned, his voice like the crack of a whip. "You dare to speak to me of freedom? The freedom you gave her was hardship and struggle. Isabella had to fight for every meal, for every moment of peace. She should have had more." Marcus stepped fully into the room, his own anger rising to meet Lorenzo's. "She wanted more than just money. She wanted a choice. She wanted to live her own life without you dictating her every move. And yes, our life was hard, but at least she lived it on her own terms." The air in the room grew thick and heavy with their unresolved grief and animosity. Leo looked from one to the other, his small hands clutching his stuffed lion. "Please," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper, "don't make Mama's room sad." The two men fell silent, the anger in their faces softening into a shared guilt. Lorenzo closed his eyes for a moment, and in the quiet, he could almost hear Isabella's voice echoing from the past. "Stop fighting, Daddy. Stop making everything about your pride." That evening, dinner was another strained affair. Anna sat between them, happily eating a bowl of macaroni and cheese that the cook had prepared especially for him. Lorenzo attempted to make conversation, asking the boy about his favorite colors and stories, but Marcus's responses were curt, his distrust a palpable presence at the table. After Leo had been put to bed, Lorenzo lingered by the massive fireplace in the library, staring into the mesmerizing dance of the flames. Marcus entered the room, his voice low and devoid of its earlier anger. "I can't stay here," he said. "Every wall in this house, every expensive piece of furniture, it all reminds me of what Isabella left behind, of everything she gave up to be with me." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But Leo, he deserves stability. And I know, damn it, I know I can't give him what you can." Lorenzo turned, surprised by the raw honesty of the admission. "Then let him stay." Marcus's eyes, glistening in the firelight, burned with a fierce, protective fire. "I'll let him stay, but I'm not leaving. I won't abandon my son. You'll have to live with me under your roof, Moretti, whether you like it or not." Lorenzo gripped his cane, the wood cool against his palm. "Then so be it. But understand this, Marcus. Isabella is gone because of you. If I see even a hint of the same weakness in how you raise her son, I will not forgive it. He will not be lost, as his mother was." Marcus stepped closer, their faces only inches apart. "And you understand this, Lorenzo. If you try to control Leo the way you controlled Isabella, you will lose him too. And this time, it won't be poverty that takes him from you. It will be his own heart." A bolt of lightning cracked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the two men locked in their silent battle. A child's future hung in the balance between them. Upstairs, in the quiet of the blue room, Leo stirred in his sleep. He dreamed of his mother's voice, soft and warm as a summer breeze. Be brave, my little lion. Someday they'll understand that love is always stronger than pride. The storm outside had passed, but its presence lingered. The storm had passed during the night, but its oppressive presence still lingered over the Moretti estate. A thick blanket of clouds hung low over the city, and a damp chill had seeped into the grand, silent halls. Lorenzo rose early, dressing with meticulous care in one of his tailored dark suits. He stood before the mirror, studying his own reflection. The face staring back at him looked older than he remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper. The weight of his grief and guilt etched permanently into his features. But today, something was different. His resolve was sharper, honed to a razor's edge. He would not lose Isabella's child, not to the world, not to poverty, and not to Marcus Thorne. In the kitchen, Leo sat perched on a high stool, his small legs swinging as the cook served him a plate of pancakes shaped like teddy bears. "They're sweet," he exclaimed with a grin, a drop of maple syrup dripping from his chin. For a moment, he was simply a child, untroubled and happy, finding joy in the small comfort of a special breakfast. Marcus sat beside him, sipping his coffee, his protective gaze never wavering from his son. When Lorenzo entered the room, the light-hearted atmosphere immediately tightened. Leo looked up and waved a syrupy fork. "Grandpa, I saved one for you." Lorenzo forced a smile, the expression feeling stiff and unnatural on his face. He sat across from the boy and accepted the offered pancake, though his appetite had long since vanished. "Thank you, Leo. You are a very thoughtful boy." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his voice low and sharp. "He's thoughtful because his mother raised him to be, not because of anything you've done." Lorenzo set his fork down with a quiet clink. "His mother is gone. What matters now is who will raise him for the future." The tension between them sharpened, a palpable thing in the air. It was broken only by Leo's soft whisper. "Please, no yelling at breakfast." Both men fell silent, their anger momentarily shamed by the small, earnest plea. Later that morning, Rocco entered the study, his face grim. "Sir, the reporters are still camped outside the gates, and now the tabloids are printing all kinds of speculation. They're calling Leo your hidden heir." He held out the latest paper, its headline printed in large, bold letters. "Moretti Dynasty Shaken. Who is the mystery grandson?" Beneath it was a grainy photograph of Leo clutching his stuffed lion, taken through the iron bars of the gate. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. They will tear him apart. Marcus stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. "This is what I warned you about. He doesn't need headlines. He needs a safe, quiet life." "A quiet life," Lorenzo shot back, his voice dripping with scorn. "Scraping by? Moving from one shelter to the next? He deserves better than that. Isabella would have wanted better for him." Marcus's voice cracked with frustration. Isabella wanted freedom. She wanted to be loved without conditions, without strings attached. Can you give that to Leo? Or are you going to smother him with your expectations and your rules, just like you smothered his mother? Lorenzo slammed his cane against the floor, the sound echoing through the cavernous study. "Do not speak to me about smothering. You had her, and yet she struggled. She suffered." His voice broke, the raw pain momentarily overwhelming his anger. He turned away, his gaze fixing on the silver-framed photograph of Isabella on the mantel. "She died." Seek. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Leo's laughter drifting from down the hall. He had discovered the grand piano in the music room and was pressing the keys with a child's curious delight. Both men turned instinctively toward the sound, their shared hostility softening for a brief, fragile moment. Isabella had once filled that same room with music. Now, her son was doing the same. They found him perched on the piano bench, his worn lion sitting beside him. He pressed a cluster of keys with his small hands and giggled. "It sounds like rain," he exclaimed. Lorenzo's heart clenched at the sight. Memories flooded back, vivid and painful, of a tiny Isabella at that very piano, her small hands stumbling over the notes until they finally blossomed into beautiful melodies. He sat down beside Leo, his own fingers gnarled and stiff, gently resting on the keys. Together, they played a clumsy, discordant duet, but the sound was punctuated by Leo's joyous laughter, which filled the room like sunshine. Marcus leaned against the doorway, his face a complex mask of sorrow and pride. The fragile peace was shattered when the front doors of the villa were thrown open and Silvia Moretti strode in. Lorenzo's younger sister was tall and impeccably dressed, her high heels clicking like gavel strikes against the marble floor. She swept into the music room, her sharp, critical eyes immediately locking onto Leo. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the air. "The papers are on fire with this scandal, and you're sitting here playing piano with a child no one even knew existed." Lorenzo rose slowly to his feet, his jaw tightening. "This is my grandson, Silvia, Isabella's son. He belongs here." Silvia's dismissive gaze cut to Marcus, who was still standing in the doorway. "And I suppose this is the man lurking in the shadows? The one who destroyed Isabella's life?" Marcus straightened, his voice steady despite the insult. "I'm his father." Silvia's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. "Of course you are. And now you've brought this child here to finish the job, to ruin what's left of our family's name." Leo shrank behind the piano bench, his small hands clutching his lion. Lorenzo's cane struck the floor like a thunderclap. "Enough! You will not speak that way in this house. He is blood. He is one of us." Silvia's eyes blazed with a cold fury. "Blood or not, the world sees him as a scandal. The investors are already calling, demanding answers. This could ruin everything we've built, Lorenzo." Lorenzo's voice, when he replied, was stronger than it had been in years, filled with a newfound conviction. "If the price of saving my grandson is ruin, then let it be ruin. I will not abandon him." From behind the bench, a small, trembling voice emerged. "Did I do something wrong?" Leo peeked out, his eyes wide and filled with tears. Lorenzo turned instantly, his anger melting away. He knelt beside the boy, his voice tender. "No, Leo. You have done nothing wrong. This is not your fault." Marcus knelt on the other side, his arm wrapping around his son's shoulders. "Don't you listen to them, little man. You're perfect just the way you are." The sight of the two men, united in their effort to comfort the child, silenced even Silvia for a moment. But her expression quickly hardened again. "This will not end well, Lorenzo. The press smells blood in the water, and they will not stop until they have their story. You are dragging all of us into a storm we may not survive." She turned sharply, her heels echoing her departure as she swept from the room. Lorenzo pulled Leo into his arms, holding him tightly. His voice was steady, but filled with a deep, aching sorrow. "No matter what anyone says, no matter what happens, I will never let you go." Across the top of the child's head, Marcus met Lorenzo's gaze. His voice was a low, challenging whisper. "Then prove it. Don't make him a pawn. Don't let him become another Isabella." The storm outside may have passed, But inside the Moretti villa, a new and more dangerous one had only just begun. A storm of family, power, love, and pride, all clashing in ways that would test every one of them to their breaking point. The following day dawned with an uneasy calm. The pack of reporters outside the Moretti estate had not dispersed. Their news vans lined the quiet, tree-lined street. A constant, invasive presence. Cameras with long lenses were perpetually aimed at the gates, waiting for the next scandalous image to emerge. Rocco had doubled the number of guards, but the faint, persistent buzz of drones flying overhead proved that their privacy was a mere illusion. Inside the mansion, the air was no less tense. Every member of the staff moved with a quiet, cautious purpose. Their whispers in the corridors, a testament to the monumental drama unfolding behind the closed doors of the family's private quarters. Lorenzo sat in the library, his cane resting against the arm of his massive leather chair, a stack of legal documents spread unread before him. His lawyers had been blunt. If the rumors that Leo was his own illegitimate child persisted, the stock prices of Moretti Holdings would continue their downward spiral. The investors were growing restless, their confidence eroding with every new headline. Yet, for the first time in his life, Lorenzo's focus was not on the numbers. His gaze kept wandering to the window, where he could hear the faint, joyous sound of giggles drifting up from the garden. Leo was outside, running through the wet grass with his stuffed lion, with Marcus close behind, pretending to be a monster chasing him. The sight caused a sharp, painful ache in Lorenzo's chest. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, he saw not just his grandson, but the ghost of his daughter's smile. The library doors opened and Sylvia entered, her movements sharp and precise, like someone carrying a burden of bad news. She dropped a folder onto the polished surface of his desk. "More damage," she announced, her voice devoid of emotion. "Two of the board members are threatening to resign. The press has already branded him the hidden heir. If you don't do something to control this narrative, Lorenzo, the family name will be dragged through the mud for a generation." Lorenzo didn't even glance at the papers. His voice was low but unshakable. "He is Isabella's son. My grandson. That is the only thing that matters." Sylvia's eyes flashed with impatience. "It matters to everyone else, Lorenzo. It matters to the investors, to the politicians who owe you favors, to the entire legacy you've spent a lifetime building. Are you really going to throw it all away for a child you met 3 days ago?" He rose slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. His posture, though stooped with age, was still commanding. "For him, yes." Sylvia stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "You're blinded by guilt. You couldn't save Isabella, so now you're trying to rewrite history with this boy. But he is not Isabella, and he does not belong in this world." The words, sharp and cruel, cut through the air like a blade. Unbeknownst to them, Leo had wandered into the hallway, drawn by the sound of their raised voices. He froze, his small hands tightening on his lion, and heard everything. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't make a sound. He simply turned and fled back to the garden, the only place in this vast, cold house that felt safe. Marcus saw the change in him immediately. He burst through the French doors, his small face crumpled in distress. "What's wrong, little man?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside him. Leo sniffled, his voice a broken whisper. She said I don't belong here." Marcus's chest tightened, a hot rage bubbling just beneath his calm exterior. He pulled the boy into a fierce hug, his eyes glaring up at the imposing stone mansion. Inside those walls, it seemed pride and politics would always matter more than a child's fragile heart. Moments later, Lorenzo emerged onto the terrace, his own face paling when he saw Leo's tears. He approached them, kneeling with a grunt of pain. "Leo, no, you do belong here. Don't you ever listen to her." But the boy just shook his head, burying his face deeper into his father's shoulder. "Everyone's always fighting," he mumbled. "Mama wouldn't want this." Marcus looked Lorenzo squarely in the eye, his gaze hard and unforgiving. "He's right. Isabella wanted peace, not a war fought over her child." Lorenzo's voice trembled with a renewed anger. "Isabella is gone because of the choices you made. Don't you dare stand there and tell me what she would have wanted." Marcus stood, his own anger barely restrained. "And she's gone because of yours, too, Moretti. Don't pretend your pride wasn't the blade that cut her away from both of us." Their argument was cut short by Rocco rushing across the lawn, his phone held out in his hand. "Sir, you need to see this." He held up the screen, displaying an online article from a major news outlet. The headline read, "Moretti family scandal deepens. Mystery man identified." Beneath it was a clear photograph of Marcus carrying Leo, taken at the cemetery. "They've identified him," Rocco said grimly. "The press knows he's the father. They're calling Leo a child of disgrace." Lorenzo's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of red. "Who leaked this?" Sylvia appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Does it really matter? The world knows now. The damage is done." Marcus held Leo tighter, as if he could physically shield him from the venom of the adult world. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. He's 6 years old, and they're already painting him as a scandal. He deserves better than this circus." Lorenzo pointed his cane at him, his voice a low thunder. "Better? And what is it that you offer him? A life of shelters and hunger? He is my blood. He stays here." Marcus's jaw clenched. "He is my son. You don't get to erase me from his life just because you have the money and the power to do so." The tension between them snapped like a drawn bowstring. Sylvia stepped forward, her words sharp and pragmatic. "Enough, both of you. If you continue this war in public, the press will eat you alive. You'll destroy not just your own reputations, but his as well." Lorenzo's shoulders heaved, his fury simmering just below the surface. He looked at Leo, at his small face pressed into his father's chest, his tiny hands gripping the worn, stuffed lion. In the boy's tears, he saw Isabella again, on the night she had walked out the door, her own face streaked with tears he had been too proud to wipe away. His heart cracked open, but his pride, that old stubborn enemy, kept his spine rigid. Finally he spoke, his voice not a shout, but a vow. "Then let the press come. Let them shout their lies from the rooftops. I lost my daughter once. I will not lose my grandson." Marcus whispered back, his voice fierce with a desperate love. "And I will not let you control him." As a distant clap of thunder echoed in the sky, the air between them grew thick with the promise of battles yet to come. Inside the grand mansion, the storm had only just begun, and a small, innocent boy stood at its very center, too young to understand the forces swirling around him, yet powerful enough to change everything. Night fell heavy and suffocating over the Moretti estate, though the intermittent glow of camera flashes from beyond the gates never ceased. The number of reporters had doubled, their indistinct voices carrying across the manicured lawns like the persistent hum of a disturbed hive. Inside, the mansion felt no less claustrophobic. Every long, shadowed hallway seemed to echo with tension. Every exchanged glance was sharp with unspoken accusations. Leo sat curled up on a vast velvet couch in the drawing room, his stuffed lion tucked securely under his chin. He had stopped asking why strangers were taking his picture or why the grown-ups in this house shouted so much. Instead, a quiet solemnity had settled over him. He sat in silence, his wide, dark eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire. David sat beside him, one arm draped protectively around his small shoulders, a silent, unmovable guardian. Lorenzo entered the room, leaning more heavily than usual on his cane. His eyes, when they fell on Leo, softened with an emotion that was almost painful to behold. But they hardened again into familiar steel when they met Marcus's. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low command. Marcus tightened his arm around Leo. "About what? About how you plan to parade him in front of the cameras to salvage your tarnished image?" Lorenzo's voice thundered back, raw and furious. "Do not twist my intentions. He is a Moretti. The world will know it, and they will respect it." A soft whimper escaped Leo's lips at the sound of the raised voices. Marcus instinctively stroked the boy's hair, his glare fixed on Lorenzo. "He's 6 years old. He doesn't need the world to respect him. He needs peace." Sylvia appeared in the doorway, her presence as sharp and chilling as a shard of ice. "You're both fools," she stated flatly. "While you two are arguing about his feelings, Julian is already making his move against us." Lorenzo turned his head sharply. "Julian? What has he done now?" Sylvia stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. "He's feeding information to the tabloids. He's leaking every rumor, every piece of gossip he can get his hands on. The story is no longer about Isabella's child. It's about you, Lorenzo. It's about your supposed hypocrisy. It's about a dynasty collapsing under the weight of its own secrets." Lorenzo's face flushed with a deep, visceral fury. "That vulture! He dares to use my daughter's child as a weapon to claw his way to power." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. "And he will succeed if you don't act. This is no longer a scandal. It's a corporate war." Marcus stood, his own fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't a game of power to me. This is my son's life. He is being dragged through headlines, mocked, humiliated, and he doesn't even understand why." Lorenzo took a step forward, his cane striking the floor with a sharp crack. "Then help me protect him. Stand with me in this, not against me." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Stand with you? The man who blames me for Isabella's death? The man who looks at me and sees nothing but the mistake his daughter made?" Lorenzo's voice shook, not with weakness, but with a lifetime of restrained pain. "I lost my daughter to you. And yes, a part of me will always blame you for that. But I will not lose her child. I cannot." Leo looked up at the two towering men, his small voice trembling as it cut through their anger. "Grandpa, Daddy, please don't fight." His plea, so simple and pure, silenced them both. He crawled down from the couch and stood between them, a tiny, fragile bridge between two worlds of pain. He reached out his small hands, taking one of each of theirs. His touch was warm and trusting, and it bound them in a way that their shared pride and grief never could. Later that evening, long after Leo had been tucked into bed, Lorenzo and Marcus met in the study. The storm of their anger had finally quieted, replaced by a tense, uneasy truce. Lorenzo poured 2 glasses of bourbon, the amber liquid glinting in the firelight. He slid one across the massive desk to Marcus. "For tonight," he said, his voice rough. Marcus eyed the glass for a moment, then took it, his reluctance clear. He sat in the leather chair opposite Lorenzo, the warm glow of the fire illuminating the exhaustion on their faces. For a long, heavy moment, they drank in silence, The only sounds the crackle of the logs and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Lorenzo spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella wrote to me once, after she left. A letter I never answered. He paused, staring into his glass, as if the memories were swirling in the liquid. She said she was happy, even if life was hard. She said that you loved her, and that was enough. He looked up, his voice raw. I didn't believe her. I tore the letter into pieces. I thought she was being foolish. Now I wonder if I was the foolish one. Marcus set his glass down, his expression unreadable. She was happy. Not always, not perfectly, but she laughed with me. We fought. We struggled. But she chose that life. She chose us. His voice faltered, until the sickness came. Lorenzo's eyes glistened, the unshed tears of a proud man. And you didn't tell me. You let her die without me ever knowing. Marcus's voice finally broke. She didn't want you to see her like that. She said you would only pity her, or worse, try to control her final days. She wanted to be free, Lorenzo, even at the very end. The words cut Richard to the core, but beneath the searing pain, he recognized the undeniable ring of truth. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his years pressing down on him. I have hated you for taking her from me. A part of me still does. But when I look at Leo, I find I can't hate you completely. You gave him to the world. Marcus's gaze softened for the first time. And I can't hate you. Not when she spoke of you, even in her last days. She said you were stubborn as a mule, but that you had loved her fiercely once. He took a deep breath. Leo deserves both of us, not as enemies, not as rivals, just as his family. Lorenzo exhaled slowly, the sound a release of decades of pent-up grief and pride. He extended his hand across the desk. For Leo, Marcus hesitated for a heartbeat, then clasped the offered hand. Their grip was firm, reluctant, but it was a beginning. Upstairs, Leo stirred in his sleep, his soft whispers addressed to his worn lion. Mama, they're trying. Maybe tomorrow they won't fight anymore. Outside, the reporters still swarmed. Julian Croft still schemed. The storm had not passed. But within the walls of the Moretti estate, for the first time, there was the faintest, most fragile glimmer of peace. Uncertain, precarious, but alive. Morning sunlight slanted across the long, polished dining table, but the air in the Moretti estate was already thick with a familiar tension. The newspaper lay open before Lorenzo, its headline screaming in bold type. Moretti dynasty crumbles. Secret grandson at center of corporate scandal. A photograph of Leo, his small hand clutching his stuffed lion, stared up at him from the page. Lorenzo's hand tightened around his coffee cup until the fine china rattled in its saucer. Marcus walked in, his hair still unkempt, his face etched with the lines of another sleepless night. He saw the paper, snatched it up without a word, and tossed it into the unlit fireplace. He is not a headline. He is a little boy. Lorenzo's voice was low, but it cut like a razor. And yet, the world insists on making him one. He leaned back, his cane resting across his lap. Julian is behind this. Sylvia was right. He is feeding them every scrap he can find. He wants control of the company, and he will use my grandson to get it. Marcus scoffed, his voice filled with a bitter frustration. Then stop playing his damned game. Keep Leo out of it. Don't drag him in front of more cameras to defend your empire. Before Lorenzo could retort, Leo padded into the room in his oversized pajamas, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He climbed onto his designated chair, the smallest presence at the massive table, yet the center of their universe. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice still thick with sleep, but his expression hopeful. Lorenzo managed a